Right, hello. This is a strange change of pace considering I've never uploaded on this channel. Um, but I was feeling particularly inspired after watching a pretty good video today. One much better than this one is gonna be. Um, if we obviously don't know what I'm talking about, but video I'm talking about is a video by the YouTuber by the name ceicocat. Um, Very interesting video, talking about the general idea of how incels, kind of have ended up as trans women, or I guess that's not the best way to put it, but essentially it's a discussion of, um, a weird trend of like 4chan incels, transitioning, as a way to cope with being men. Um, but that's not the part of the video that inspired me to discuss what I'm going to talk about. It was more about Keiko Cat's portion. Essentially, it's her autobiography and her experience with being trans. And I guess sorry, I'm moving my mic here. I was feeling particularly inspired by that, just because it was a pretty gut-wrenching, yet very honest and vulnerable description of her experience being trans, or at the very least gender non-conforming. And I guess based on a lot of the stuff she was talking about in her video, I don't know, I kind of got a burst of inspiration to make my own style of essentially yapping away about my experience with being trans. And I guess, I guess I should start with introductions. My name is Holly. Do a little drawing of myself here. It's not gonna be a very good one. I'm not an artist by any means. Now what my hair looks like. Looks much better. Not to brag. But yeah, my name's Holly. I am 22 years old, and I am trans femme, as you can see by what I'm writing on my screen. And I kind of wanted to make my own video, perhaps just because it's a good way to vent about things, but also because I feel like in a lot of the, I guess, YouTube content or social media content I've seen about being trans, there hasn't been many, I guess, creators that I've been able to relate to deeply. That's not to say that there's not a lot of shared experience between what we're doing, what we're going through, I should say, and kind of the auxiliary experiences attached to that, but more so, just because there's some things, I guess, internally, in terms of like your feelings, and how you view yourself and identify yourself, that, I don't know, I haven't really met a lot of trans femmes that kind of shared the same experience I do. So perhaps this video will serve as some kind of solace for somebody who perhaps has had similar experiences to mine. And I kind of have my drawing pad up here on Clip Studio, just because I thought it'd be fun to have something going on while I'm talking. And I guess what I want to talk about essentially is my own journey, with both realizing I was trans and also kind of the differences from, I guess, the usual narrative that I had to deal with. And just as a preface, I will say that none of what I'm going to discuss here is going to be a case of me discounting the experiences of other people. I am going to make very repeated references to, I guess, this overarching trans narrative, and I feel like I should explain what I'm saying when I say that before I jump into this video. When I talk about the overarching, let's do that again, overarching trans experience, or I guess the very default one that you're used to seeing in media, what I'm talking about is, I guess, the story that if you were cis, you would probably assume of trans people if you're just meeting one or just hearing about them or something like that. And that kind of story or narrative, or I guess shared experience, being your typical young child who practically at the age of 3 to 4, they're already saying like, hey, I'm a boy, or I'm a girl. Kind of your, I guess, I don't want to say run of the mill, but kind of like what you would see in a very haphazardly produced movie about a trans person, where essentially there are signs throughout their entire life of them being trans from birth into, I guess we'll say, adulthood. You know, where you have people saying, yeah, I was wearing dresses at the age 5. I was talking about my dysphoria at 6, or I was experiencing dysphoria at a young age, or, you know, I found myself playing with Barbies instead of Hot Wheels, or playing with Hot Wheels instead of Barbies. You know, you're very, I guess, watered down version of very I guess the trans experience. I'm gonna be editing this a little bit, so we'll figure that out as we go. But I get, that's kind of my explanation for what I'm discussing here when I talk about a very default trans narrative, or a default story about coming out. Again, prefacing this, that's what the experience you had. Not saying that it's a bad thing, or it's basic, or it's wrong. Really just an observation. I am referring to it as such just because I am, I guess, comparing my experience being trans with what a lot of people experience. So, I guess to start, we'll do some introductions, some preface. So yeah, my name is Holly. I already said that. And I guess to start with my early life, I was very much like any other young boy at the time. I was kind of just chilling. I was a pretty happy kid. Very bad depiction of myself there, but I digress. You know, I like doing things like, you know, playing video games. Just draw a little controller there. Sticks. When I was younger, I liked reading books. Very bad book there, but you get the idea. Couldn't make this Narnia. And yeah, um, very typical young boy activities, but essentially kind of why I'm starting at the beginning is kind of the difference from this, I guess, perceived trans experience that I believe society has about all trans people. Where this young boy here at the age of 5 is wearing, you know, princess dress, something like that, you know, saying they like Cinderella, or maybe they're, you know, playing with Barbies instead of cool cars, and I don't know what else, you know? But I assume if you're watching this video, you kind of understand where I'm going with this. But yeah, essentially, this is kind of what I often see as what society kind of expects out of trans people, and particularly in my experience, I'm going to say this is mostly my experience as a trans femme, you know, for my trans masks, or just gender non-conforming people in general. Chances are this isn't going to line up one-to-one with what you experienced. I highly doubt it. Everybody's different. But perhaps you will be able to draw some comparisons to your own life and your own experiences. But yeah, I would package this as society's trans person. Definitely not a term that's gonna stick or anything like that. Not really intending it to be like that. But it's a term I use with, I guess, my friends and internal discussions I've had with myself, where essentially society has a very, I guess, one-lane view. This is a two-lane road, I know, but I just want to draw a road. One-lane view about what a trans person is supposed to be. You know, exhibiting signs from early in life where kind of everybody knows, yeah, that that kid isn't normal, or, you know, wow, that guy's really into a lot of girly stuff. You know, he's playing with Barbies, he's wearing dresses, he's hanging out with a lot of girls instead of the boys. And then, you know, down the line we progress to like, oh, they get older, maybe they're getting bullied or something, or, you know, the dysphoria gets worse, more active, long-winded discussions and internal struggles with their gender identity, and how that affects how they interact with the world around them. But I guess in my case, it was never really that way for me. We're really gonna sorry I'm hitting the undo button so much, but not really a good way to do this. I'm very dumb at doing stuff live on camera. But from my experience, starting off with this young boy, we can essentially chain this all the way down throughout my entire childhood, up and through my teenage years, and really, in reality, quite literally, until 2021. At this point, I am already an adult. You know, I am 19 years old. Again, very bad depiction of me. Guess I'm not making myself that much taller here. But you get the point. I'm 19 years old already. You can say I'm already not far into my adulthood, but I've been an adult for a while at this rate. Um, and essentially, at that time, at least at the beginning of 2021, I was still that same boy into video games. Maybe not into books so much, but I do have a love for technology, which I still have today. Not the best at it, but I would say I'm decent at working with computers. And I guess, I'm still that same young boy, and the point I'm making here is that between these 2 points, there was never really... I mean, there was, but there wasn't as obvious as or telltale signs of me being trans as there was in your typical society's trans person story, where from very early ages, I'm repeating myself here, but from very early ages, there's signs that, hey, at some point, you can probably expect this person to be gender non-conforming in some way, or perhaps they are going to eventually struggle with their gender identity. But for me, it really wasn't like that. Now, this isn't to say that at the time I was super content with being perceived as a man, something that I'll be expanding upon in a little bit here. But kind of at this rate, being seen as a man was really for me just, I guess it didn't mean anything. Like, at all. I understood that, being an adult and all, and dealing with the reality of the world, especially at the time, obviously I understood the implications of, societal interactions, your professional life, how you interact with other people, how other people interact with you, how that affected, how that is kind of subconsciously affecting your behavior, how you dress. I could go on and on and on about the effects of gender identity and a very strict gender binary on, how you behave. But for me, deep down, personally, just like in my consciousness or my heart of hearts, for lack of a better term, again, it didn't mean much to me. It's not something I was thinking about a lot. I was never really thinking about how being a man was affecting my place in the world. At least when we're talking about just deep-seated emotions. Little brain of mine. I'll say huge brain, not to brag. But yeah. And what I was talking about earlier, where while I didn't have the same experience as other trans people, there were still signs that I wasn't really the boy and man that, a lot of people expected me to be, or I guess society expects you to be. Kind of early in life, I was kind of deviating away from things like, sports, and, I guess believing that cooties were a thing. That's a very childish example, but you get where I'm coming from here. In terms of how other boys acted, I always felt, I guess, a little bit of a disconnect. Here's me, I guess, sitting in a corner, contemplating how I'm not like other boys. This is more like hindsight is 2020 At the time, I was just kind of doing this to do it because I was a kid. But I guess I now realize that, you know, the other boys, I was very much not alienated, bullied, or disrespected, but, you know, there always felt like there was this very thin barrier between the two of us. And while this sounds like the very stereotypical society's trans person story I outlined before, when I talk about this barrier, it was very small. You know, basically 10 minutes later, you would find me talking to these guys, you know, really chopping it up and having a lot of fun. You know, not something I really let get to me. But yeah, it was there. There was always this kind of haze that I noticed where I'm like, I like these people. I like these boys. I guess I'm a boy too, but I don't know if I totally get what that means. Or I guess I'm experiencing it really differently. I don't know. Obviously at the age, too young to care. And then I guess middle school, we're gonna go up here because I don't have a lot of space here. Middle school is kind of where maybe things got a little more obvious. And one of the first things I noticed is that I'm gonna admit, still am, but basically at the time I was, draw my legs here, I was very hairy for a dude in middle school. You know, copious amounts of leg hair, arm hair, all that stuff. No facial hair, unsurprisingly, but in terms of body hair, I had a lot. And that was another one of those points where I guess you can see it as a sign. Perhaps, you know, again, looking back, I think this is my first experience with dysphoria, where while I didn't have like a seething hatred or disgust with my body hair, I definitely didn't like it at all. It's just one of those things that really, I guess, bothered me, that I had so much, and kind of just being that damn hairy just made me feel a certain way about my body and how I presented myself, especially my legs. Even now you can ask people, but there is not a lot of times you would catch me without long pants of some variety. Here's like some really shitty jeans. I don't know why my body is so off to the right, but you get the point. I was almost always in some kind of pair of long pants because I guess to a certain degree I felt a sense of shame when it came to my body hair, or I just kind of didn't want to deal with the fact that I had it or that it existed. And again, this for me was more so, you know, obviously I know there's a lot of cis men who do shave their body hair because they don't like it, but for me, at the time it was a lot more than that. Obviously there was the fact that I could just shave it off if I really wanted to, but I kind of had this slight disgust. Disgust is a strong word, but actually it really fits here. This slight disgust with the fact that I knew that even if I shaved my hair, it was going to keep coming back. And I kind of was jealous, I guess, of girls in my class, because, you know, they really didn't have to deal with that, apparently. Obviously, I know that's not exactly the case for everybody, but from the people I talked to and the people I interacted with, you know, it wasn't really a problem any of the girls in my class had. And for me, that was a point of contention. I was jealous, you know. I was jealous that, wow, you don't really have to manage all this body hair. It doesn't grow back, you know. You never have to manage it, and I'm stuck with it, even if I shave. And I think that was like And even to this day, my body hair is one of my biggest sources of dysphoria. Something that I've been learning to deal with much better now that I'm adult. Now that I am an adult. But yeah, I think this was one of the first small signs of, I guess, this barrier between me and other boys my age. Then we move on to high school. High school is kind of gonna get its own section over here. Just because it's a tad easier to discuss. And I'm gonna be honest, I had a very good high school, I guess, a good time in high school. I'm not really gonna jump into anything about, difficulty with being perceived as a man in high school or being bullied. This is a Roblox fist for context. I guess that's my representation of bullying here. But yeah, still kind of the same guy, same boy, growing into a man at this point. My dysphoria surrounding my body hair is now much worse. Sad face as a portrayal of that. Much worse. I got much hairier, obviously, with the struggles of puberty. And it was still a big source of, I guess, bodily disgust in my life at the time. But what I started noticing is, obviously, as you get older, the reality of society, the realities of things, of how gender affects your world and how you interact with people, started becoming more prevalent. I guess I started to notice more, how gendered everything was, and also how, I guess, how men were acting as they walked onwards into adulthood. Arrow right into adulthood. This is a dude. And as I started noticing these things, I kind of felt that barrier between me and other dudes kind of grow in size. Again, nothing insane, but it felt more noticeable. And at the time, in high school, I was, at least behind the scenes, I was dealing with a particularly nasty identity crisis. Or, I wouldn't say identity crisis, but personality crisis. Much of my personality, was very flat. I wasn't particularly known for anything special. I was relatively smart, did really well in school, and I had my interests in video games and computer stuff. But beyond that, I guess what I ended up realizing is that in middle school and before that, besides what other people have described as very optimistic and positive attitude, I didn't have much of a personality. I really didn't know who I was. I didn't really, it's not like I didn't think for myself, but let's just say, for better context, a lot of the personality I developed in high school was kind of taken from my friends. Friends I'm still friends with today, love them to death. But essentially, you know, I kind of latched on to these people as a way to kind of just mirror how they act, you know? And that's kind of what my personality was in high school. You know, there were moments that people would just kind of describe me as uh, very similar to my closer friends. How we all acted the same, or I guess, you know, very much seen as a package deal. And yeah, and that's mostly because of that personality crisis I was having, where I kind of realized that from certain factors of my upbringing, I've never really developed much of a personality. I kind of just was who I was. And to kind of compound on top of this, I guess, mimicry I was doing with my friends, I would definitely argue that in middle school and high school, to a certain degree, I was very attention seeking. Not out of any malicious thing or some kind of like internal struggle or trauma or neglect of some kind, but I guess I just really wanted people to like me. Sometimes I was a bit rambunctious, purely because I wanted people to, I guess, like me and also just pay attention to me. Even with that in mind, I was still kind of in the background a lot of the time. It did feel like that. But this combination of mimicry and attention-seeking behavior really kind of, like I was discussing earlier, made that barrier between me and other men more obvious. While I understood how a lot of boys acted and how women interacted with them, and you know what that meant in terms of their interests and how they act, to me it really just didn't make a lot of sense. I really didn't care to bear it any mind. It's just not something that ever clicked with me. And that was kind of like a lot of my high school experience. Again, love all my friends. All this talking about mimicry and stuff isn't because, you know, I'm saying, oh, I had to latch onto these randos and they had to give me my personality or something. No, it's just, you know, I liked my friends and, you know, we hung out a lot, so I kind of just ended up acting like them. But yeah, I think this is another point where I started noticing just a lot of differences between me and other boys. Just that kind of very small but very ever-present barrier between each of us. Now, I kind of want to get into how this eventually led to me, I guess, being trans. So I'm gonna go ahead and pick a new canvas here, just because it's gonna be a little easier to start from fresh. But essentially, this stuff that's happening in high school, where, you know, my personality labels P is kind of just all over the place, and this divide I have with the other men my age, this all kind of just progressed more rapidly as I came out of high school. My first barrier, or I guess experience with, I guess, my own identity and also being queer, was my sexuality, by SX. All throughout high school, there's always this kind of, this is me right here, by the way, I just thought in the back of my mind, where I'm like, men. I could probably date them. I would argue that this is very different now. My sexuality is very, very much not one-stop shop unchanging, especially after coming out as trans. But at the time, I was like, I like men and women. I think. I'm pretty sure, at least. And, you know, kind of living in this quarantine era, you have a lot more time to kind of just sit there and think for yourself. And this is what I did. Many days, if I was just really bored, I'm just kind of sitting in bed. Hands behind my head. Me sitting in bed, kind of thinking like, I probably like dudes. Maybe. Who knows? Did end up being the truth, and I did end up dating a guy for a very brief period in 2021. But essentially this was kind of my first interaction with being queer. You know? And kind of having to not make peace with that, but kind of be like, oh, you know, this makes a lot of sense. This is really explaining this divide I had in high school. And essentially, this moment right here, where I kind of accepted it myself, was a catalyst for a lot of things happening down all these diverging paths and stuff. But we're not going to cover that many in this video, because it's already going to drag pretty long. But yeah, essentially, I kind of noticed that, you know, realizing I'm queer, a lot of things in my life started making a lot more sense. Again, like I mentioned before, this kind of divide I had with the other boys in my class, and just kind of how I perceived myself in high school. I would say now, you know, almost 4 years later, I definitely feel like I have developed a personality of my own. You know, I would say there's still remnants of how I acted in high school in there. But yeah, in general, I do feel like I've developed a more solid sense of self, especially now. But at the time, this was kind of like the infant stages of that happening. And yeah. So at this rate, I realized that I am bisexual. Still am to some degree, but I'm leaning more towards lesbian nowadays. Because it makes a lot more sense for me. But yeah, at the time, you know, I'm saying, okay, I'm bisexual. And I guess this is a good time as any to kind of start on the more heavy stuff. It's not going to be super heavy, but unfortunately it's pretty hard to make these videos without talking about experience with parents. It's a very horrible drawing of what my parents look like. But yeah, this is mom, this is dad. At the time, my struggle here is that I did not know anything, or not much, about what my parents thought of queer people. My parents were very, perhaps, silent about their political views. Obviously, there were some things that they were very outspoken about, especially my own mother, being an immigrant, being from Costa Rica, and myself being born there. There were certain, you know, especially when we're talking about the 2016 election cycle or 2020 election cycle, there's things that kind of pertained and applied more actively in our lives. 1 second here, because I realize I have to loop the music. Alright, we're back. But yeah, um, essentially, beyond the more obvious stuff that kind of applied really directly, to my mother and my family in Costa Rica, there wasn't much discussion of, I guess, politics in the house, or at least not a lot of discussion about social issues, which really is the core of what we're discussing here. Obviously, we can this connects to other things as well, but that's not really what we're discussing in this video. But yeah, essentially there was very little discussion about just social topics in general, you know? There wasn't a lot of discussions about queer people, a lot of discussions about just bigotry in general, or, you know, outspoken support for marginalized groups. It was kind of just not a thing, you know? It wasn't really a thing that, at least before this point, I had to think about. But now, coming out as bisexual, well, not coming out, but realizing I'm bisexual, it's something that I started thinking about a lot more. And now, what we're talking about here is essentially, there was the point I was dating another dude for a while, and I was hiding it from my parents. Not because I thought they were gonna be unsupportive. Perhaps there was part of me that was like that, or, you know, I didn't feel like I was gonna be in any real danger. But mostly because of that unknown, because of that known fact, it made it scary. And to be completely honest, it wasn't completely unknown. There was some moments where, some pretty, not nasty, but pretty overtly homophobic or transphobic stuff was said by either one or both of my parents. So there were those few experiences that I had that kind of compounded that feeling of just anxiety around essentially one day having to tell them, or one day they figure out. Now, what ended up happening is I did come out to, really bad arrow, did come out to my mother eventually. Let's say this is me, her talking. That's her on the right. She looks like she has a mullet, but we can look past that. But yeah, I came out to my mom, and this was kind of the start of a very odd string of, or a very odd relationship I had with my mother specifically, but really with both my parents. My mother wasn't necessarily unsupportive. She didn't kick me out of the house, but essentially my mom is the kind of person who, obviously, she's never been faced with this before, so she doesn't understand, right? But unfortunately, to some degree, she doesn't seek to understand. She doesn't understand, but she has a hard time learning. Even with me there in her life as a very direct resource, you know? As someone who she could reference to kind of ask about my experiences. And coming out as bisexual, one of the biggest things that stuck with me, I'm gonna be honest, it wasn't a very positive experience, because there was no, and I still kind of stand by this, there was no consideration for my turmoil. I remember essentially wanting to cry, but the entire time I had to comfort my mother. She was crying more than me. It's really awkward and strange. I essentially basically had to hold, you know, rub her back and say, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. Which, you know, at the time I'm thinking, that's ridiculous. Why was I doing that? And again, this isn't me discounting the kind of shock that a parent would have from hearing this. I understand for people of that generation, it's just wasn't really the norm, and parents have expectations for you and stuff like that, which I will be getting into in a later segment of this video. But essentially, yeah, your parents have expectations for you and stuff, and I guess my mom was so distraught by it to an amount that's just, for me, pretty redonkulous. But yeah, she was pretty distraught by it, and I had to comfort her for hours and hours. It was pretty gut-wrenching, I'm not gonna lie. Obviously, thank God I didn't get kicked out, or didn't get slapped around, or actually like abused in some manner. But for me, it was gut-wrenching that there was no moment of, I guess, overt support or any questions about how I was doing, or if I was doing, or if I was distraught. Essentially, I'm over here comforting my mother, damn near apologizing for coming out, kind of something that at the time I still regret doing, as in I probably should have been more steadfast with my own identity and have some self-respect. But let bygones be bygones, I guess. Not much I can do about it now. And this kind of started this weird streak relationship with my mother, where essentially there was this desire on her part to kind of stuff that reality away. Essentially, sure, she's going to understand, she still loves me, right? It's not like she's kicking me out or anything, but to some degree she is kind of just stuffing it away in the back of her mind. It's not something that she wants to think about. Perhaps if I ask my mother, perhaps it's not like that at all, and I'm just making a very gross assumption about her thoughts. But genuinely, outside looking in, that's what it seemed like. There was a desire to kind of avoid the topic of conversation. There's no discussions about it at all. And really, at the time, I had also actively, told my mom, hey, when I came out, I really just didn't like how that went. I ended up comforting you more than I got any comfort from my own mother, to the point where I damn near felt like the bad guy for even doing it in the first place. And essentially, that made my mother even more upset. Obviously, she kind of, I'm not gonna say victimized herself, but I guess slightly victimized herself for that entire interaction. And yeah, it just sucked, right? It didn't really feel like I had that many people in my corner, but I'm not going to go on about the sexuality stuff that much. But essentially, what this leads to is that me and my mother have a strained relationship about queerness. The only time she herself would bring up queerness, it's essentially just sit there and tell me, hey, I don't want you interacting with the community, with the LGBTQ community, right? Essentially, she perceives the queer community as this very, I guess, this monolith, this damn near, I guess, corporation or organization that tells you what you're supposed to think, instead of it just being like a term for queer people in general and the camaraderie that we may share. But yeah, that's the only time she would bring it up. And this starts that strained relationship with my queerness. And this is gonna get into next portion of, I guess, this video essay, if you want to call it that. where essentially we're now moving into my time in college and kind of just exploring myself more, developing a personality of my own. And essentially at the time, a lot of things were happening. I was, obviously getting older. I started letting my hair grow out a lot more. Just because, well, I liked having long hair. Very bad hair, but you get what I'm trying to do here. Let my hair grow out more. Started painting my nails, which you can't really portray with a stick figure. Started painting my nails. Around this entire time, I was also learning a lot about politics and society, and I was already had been, but I was getting much more radicalized. Not into anything bad, just learning a lot more about, socioeconomic things and bigotry and, just in general, kind of developing my own views and really the start of my... Alright, I'm gonna edit that out. Maybe, I don't know yet. I suck at editing, but essentially what I'm saying there is that I was already very progressive, but going into college and becoming an adult, it became even more prevalent in my life. I was much more active in community building, mutual aid. I became very anti-capitalist, and all in all, I desired to learn more about how marginalized groups were treated in this country, and that's kind of relevant because it's going to come into the discussion of me discovering that I'm trans. And I guess you're waiting for some big reveal about my transness and how it came to be, but unfortunately it's really very simple, and it's kind of why I made this video, because I've never been really able to find other people that share these same experiences with me. Essentially, it was just one, I'm already, at the time, I had friends who described me as more effeminate. We're gonna do with EF here, effeminate. That divide between me and especially college boys, especially frat guys and stuff like that, was so much wider. That I was kind of just doing my own thing. I was already interacting with other queer people because I was bisexual, so on and so forth. But essentially, there was two major catalysts. One is going to be much larger than the other. But essentially, I basically met a group of friends online. I guess I'll just draw like the globe. Met a group of people online, essentially mostly queer people, and a lot of them are trans. And essentially, this is kind of was my first active taste of, I guess, kind of sharing the same experiences as other people. That barrier had flown off into space, and these people felt like people who I could more easily relate to, and who had shared not identical but very similar experiences to mine. And essentially, it's kind of where I started that journey of discovering myself more. After discussions with these people and kind of, feeling that growing gap between me and other cis men, eventually I kind of didn't have a gender in my own eyes. I started going by they them pronouns. At the time, I said I was agender, non-binary. I didn't really have a label for it. Just kind of this very loose connection, being a man, and also a sense of incongruence with being a man and perceived as a man. And yeah, that's basically the people I met there, who I'm still friends with, were a very big catalyst for that. But yeah, essentially I started off on this route of basically not really understanding my own gender identity, and kind of just doing away with it in general, which, you know, if that's you, super cool, badass, totally get it. But even that didn't necessarily feel right. And then, funny enough, the other catalyst was TikTok. And I'm not saying this as I became trans because of people on TikTok, but at the time, there was this video of a lot of very pretty women, of course, a lot of pretty women posing to a song as part of a trend. And I don't know what it was about this video, but it just, if there was an egg and there was cracks in it, this blew the egg and my mind wide open. Essentially, those feelings about my body hair, to some degree my voice, about how I looked, my body proportions in general, all kind of just started making sense. It was definitely a aha moment for me, where I kind of just went, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Off this one video of these women posing to a song, where those, again, like I said, those feelings I had before about my own body kind of came back tenfold, not in a super negative way, but they came back tenfold, and I realized the deep-seated envy, jealousy, whatever you want to call it here, that I had for these women, you know? That kind of feeling like, dang, you know, wow, it would be really cool to be a pretty girl, and also, I think that is what I've wanted to be or am striving to be. And yeah, you know, again, this is kind of, it's a long intro segment because it's a lot of preface, but these other segments are probably going to be longer. But yeah, essentially that's kind of how I realized I was trans. I was like, oh shit, pretty girls are cool. I want to be a pretty girl. I have a lot of body image issues that could be explained by that, and I don't feel a close connection to a lot of my cis peers. So yeah, there's my exhilarating story of how I realized I was trans. Picked out the name Holly. Not really a huge deal, but yeah, that's kind of how it happened. And you may be asking, well, is that the entire video, Holly? No, because I think that there is the simplest part, but it's kind of what happened after I came out. I realized that about myself and came out to people socially, where really the meat and potatoes of this video really is. So yeah, you know, I'm 20. I come out to myself, I guess. And I'm kind of dealing with the reality of being trans. And one of the things that I very much struggled with was dysphoria. And this is gonna be like a dichotomy. My dysphoria was, and I would say still is, not bad. Like, even back then, especially, the dysphoria I had was not super bad. It was very tame. It's for things that you would argue are very, easy to remedy. But yeah, I didn't have bad dysphoria, and this kind of goes into what I'm kind of discussing next here. Was I guess this lack of bad dysphoria, compounded with very stereotypical portrayals of trans people that I've seen throughout my life, made me feel like I didn't belong. This could be the trans flag. I really don't want to add color, so you can just imagine this is the trans flag. I really didn't feel like I didn't belong, To some degree, all the stories you hear about, oh, I realized when I was really young that I was a girl, or the stories of, or people describing their experience with dysphoria, like, oh, it's really bad. Some days I literally can't get out of bed. For me, that's kind of like, is this a requirement? Do all these things need to be true for me to be trans? And yeah, that's kind of what I'm discussing here, where essentially I knew I was trans, but there was a sense of not really fitting this mold that either society or just perceptions of queer people have crafted for the trans community, And I didn't fit that mold to any degree. Obviously I was okay with my dysphoria. I still had it, but to me, it was a struggle to feel like I was trans when it was kind of like, wait, do I really need to like just have such, deep-seated self-image problems? I'm making it sound very unprofessional there, but you kind of get what I'm stabbing at here. But yeah, my very tame dysphoria made me feel like I wasn't actually doing it right. You say, well, Polly, that's very, very silly. What do you mean you're not doing it right? It's like, yeah, I don't know either. Why do I feel like I'm not doing it right? But, I guess for me, it was just kind of one of those things that, like, perhaps I have to suffer to be trans. Very, very dangerous mindset that I've since gotten rid of. But at the time, recently coming out to myself and closer friends, it was something I had to think about a lot. And on top of that came my experience with, I guess, femininity and my connection to more feminine things, or just femininity in general. I myself consider myself I guess feminine, but this is kind of where that discussion about politics and social issues comes to mind. Is at the time I became trans, I was already pretty, I guess, deep into understanding more nuanced and complex ideas about gender identity, gender performance, gender presentation, the colonial gender system. Essentially, I had very much radicalized myself out of seeing gender, if that makes any sense at all. But basically, you know, because of that, my ideas of being feminine and masculine are so very different from people who are more locked into a very traditional black and white binary mindset between men and women. And yeah, essentially what this meant for me, on top of that much less intense dysphoria that I experienced, kind of basically made it so I didn't really fit the image of a trans woman in the eyes of society, of my friends, and eventually my family, but we're gonna get into that soon. But you know, even nowadays, I still have like a lot of what you would consider quote unquote men's clothing, that I'm perfectly comfortable with wearing, just because I don't really have a lot of issues with wearing that kind of clothing. I will say that I think now more than ever, now that I'm older, and the reality of, you know, getting on HRT and physically transitioning is much more realistic. I will say my dysphoria around clothing has perhaps increased a little bit. Like, I have women's clothing that I don't wear just because my dysphoria is bad. I don't really feel like I'm doing it right, or I'm performing it right. And you know, there are many days that I look on in jealousy as very pretty women on social media get to wear very beautiful outfits that I always say I want to do that, but I'm ugly, or you know, I don't pass or anything. But I digress. That's a different tangent. But you know, back to the point. Essentially, my ideas of gender and you know, gender presentation were very different from your typical, I guess, cis persons and sometimes trans people's idea of what gender identity and gender performance and presentation is. And essentially, this kind of compounded that feeling of feeling like I was doing this whole trans thing, quote unquote, wrong. You know, I've had other people approach me in the past and kind of say, hey, you say you're trans, but it doesn't seem like you're trying. And obviously for somebody like me, with what I just discussed, it was kind of like, what does trying mean? Obviously, you know, I'm not dense, I get it. It means, you know, you're not presenting yourself as a woman when you say you are, or feminine when you say you are. So, you know, you must not be trans. And of course, obviously, to me, that's BS. But yeah, it was a question I was faced with, and it's not one I really had an answer to, you know? I couldn't really expect everybody else to have the same very progressive and radical ideas of gender that I had. So those are just questions I kind of fielded and dealt with as they came. But it definitely didn't help, you know. There's a lot of moments, and still some moments now, where I felt like a fraud, right? Where essentially it was some huge affront to nature, society, and people in my life for me to claim, quote unquote, that I am a woman, or at least a girl, or, you know, at least trans femme. So yeah, I kind of felt like a fraud because of that, and that's just not something I've been able to track down with a lot of other trans girls that I've, you know, been online or seen stories about on YouTube or video essays, video rants like this one. Couldn't really find an experience that kind of highlighted that feeling. Perhaps, I'm not gonna say, it's a completely unique experience. Obviously, feeling like a fraud and feeling like you're doing something wrong is a very common feeling, but essentially, this kind of combo of having much more progressive thoughts about gender and this general lack of bad dysphoria were kind of just mixing to this big poop storm of what the hell am I doing? And yeah, essentially, I was kind of in this rock and a hard place where I kind of feel like I wasn't doing anything right, It's like, am I actually cis? Hell no. Hell no. I'm definitely not cis. But am I trans though? It's like, yes, but like, no one believes me. That was the biggest emotion I dealt with, is no one believes me. I could scream from the rooftops, hey, my name is Holly, I use she, her pronouns, I'm trans femme, here I am. Even if I did that, that pervasive feeling of no one believes me really stuck with me. That's the thing. While I am very steadfast about my gender identity, I am a realist as well. I do understand that, at first glance, you wouldn't be able to tell that about me. Maybe if you saw the back of my long hair, you would make that mistake. It's happened before, much to my excitement. But, for a lot of my friends that I interact with in real life and stuff, I was basically the complete and utter opposite of their perceptions of trans women. I've asked some of my cis friends about this. Essentially, it's like, hey, so just be frank with me. Only this a couple times, because sometimes the truth fucking hurts. But essentially, I kind of asked them, hey, when I say I'm trans, how does that make you feel about me? Like, well, what do you think about that as it pertains to me? And I had 1, 2, or 3 friends basically tell me, like, yeah, to be honest, I sometimes forget, or sometimes, this is out of kind of them just not understanding, not out of maliciousness, but basically I'm saying, like, I kind of have a hard time understanding at times why you believe you're trans. And obviously, ouch, first of all, but also B, it always came out of a place of them not really understanding and never out of maliciousness. Still friends with those people, and they don't say stuff like that now. But yeah, essentially, again, that one feeling of no one believes me kind of was a dark cloud over my life and over my own perceptions of myself. Yeah, so no one believes me. That's the feeling I had. And moving down the timeline here, of more recent years and stuff, my connection with womanhood, I felt like grew deeper, at least internally. Obviously, hearing my voice, or if you saw a picture of me, you'd probably be like, what the hell is she talking about? She is just straight up lying. But yeah, my connection with womanhood, I feel like deepened, at least internally. I feel like in my mind, my psyche, my personality, my thoughts, and otherwise, I just had a deeper connection with womanhood. At the time, I started getting those very, I guess, default pinings of wanting to have been raised as a little girl, having been cis and stuff like that. Not something I feel anymore, not to that degree at least, but you know what I mean. I deepened that connection, and essentially to this day, the one thing that kind of pervades my mind most of the time is that feeling of no one believes me. Especially last year, which I'm gonna get to here, get into here. That feeling got compounded. I use the word a lot, but basically got exaggerated by when I came out to my parents. You know, to say that my parents were, I'm not gonna say not happy, but it was genuinely one of those experiences that I kind of don't want to go back and deal with again. Obviously, I'd wish things had ended differently, but it did not. And kind of to give you a rundown, it was a pretty horrible experience. My mom found a makeup bag full of makeup that one of my friends had bought me, and essentially she, again, very traditional woman, not so traditional to the point where, you know, she just hates anything progressive, but, you know, getting acclimated to these new things and kind of having outright support, respect for them off the bat was an unrealistic expectation. But yeah, so she grabbed my bag, said, "Hey, we're coming into the kitchen with your father and we're gonna talk." And there it was. I didn't even get the chance to come out. She just straight up asked, "Are you trans? Tell me, are you trans?" And funnily enough, this had happened one time in the past. They had driven 5 hours all the way to where I went to college to ask me if I was trans once already. At the time I lied and said no. But this time I said, this is, if this is gonna be what it is, and I'm not gonna get the choice to choose when the time is right, why not do it now? And yeah, I came out to my parents. Genuinely, to this day, it was just one of those experiences that I so not deeply regret doing, but it was just so, I can't repeat it. Not again. And a lot of what happened when I came out as bisexual kind of ended up happening here. Again, there was a lot of dismissal of what I was feeling. In exchange, I had to comfort my mother, right? And then also field questions from my father that I didn't want to field, which I'll talk about here in a second. But yeah, that same case of I'm admitting this very important and, in my eyes, special thing to my parents. I'm being very, very vulnerable, despite having been pushed into a corner. And it's something I kind of want them to discuss with me. Maybe, you know, maybe ask me more questions that are too, you know, I guess intrusive or anything. But no. that's not how it played out. And honestly, I've chosen to forget so much about what happened at the time that I kind of don't remember it. But I just recall having to deal with so many questions. And the ones that really got to me, especially with my very, I guess, atypical trans journey, was the questions of why. Why are you trans? How do you know? You know, things of that nature. They were nearly impossible for me to answer, because the only answer I could give, beyond references to dysphoria I had and stuff like that, the only answer I had was, I just know I am. I just know. I just know, having to repeat myself like a broken record. Say, I just know. I'm sorry, but I just know. Say, and then having to basically have both my mother and father try to convince me that this is some kind of strange phase, or some kind of, I don't know, some kind of thing that isn't true, some kind of rushed realization, or some misguided understanding of myself that I hadn't really ran through my brain yet. And yeah, that really sucked, you know. I had my own mother basically talking about what I was discussing earlier, like, yeah, but usually the trans people I know, you know, they're, from the day they're born, they're acting like the opposite gender, you know. They want Barbies, they say they're girls, they use girl names, they wear dresses, but you didn't do all that, so it's hard to believe you're trans. Again, that no one believes you feeling, coming back with a pretty nasty kickback there. And then my own father, who still, for at this point in my life, an enigma in terms of what his views on this kind of stuff. But yeah, he cold opened with, you know, maybe this is like a social media thing. It's getting pretty trendy to be trans in this country. Is it one of those things? Do you have friends who are telling you that this is what you should do? And to me, that hurt a lot more than many things, where essentially, you know, I was being told, hey, you're not trans. The turmoil you've gone through is non-existent. You are doing this because people online said you should be. And to me, I took very deep offense to that. Again, it's just one of those things that, even if I managed to bring up the conversation of me being trans to my parents nowadays, chances are my own father would try to make a point using that, you know, using that narrative. But yeah, no, that was very tough. The next few days were more rough. I felt very alienated from my parents. Once again, my mother was back on the trend of, you know, if I ordered something, it's, you know, sorry, if there's any discussion about being queer, it's all just gonna be critiques. I guess critiques of the community, or very gross misunderstandings about trans people that don't make a lot of sense and don't necessarily feel very studied. But yeah, no, that was it was rough. It was rough, to be honest. And yeah, I kind of wanted to discuss that just to see if there's people, you know, other trans femmes that have had that experience where perhaps your trans identity isn't a point of contention within your household or among your friends, your family, whoever it may be. But rather uh, hold on. I have completely lost my train of thought. Essentially, I want to see if there's other trans femmes who have kind of gone through that experience where, you know, they have to deal with that feeling of no one believes me, especially when it comes with their own parents. And that's kind of why I wanted to pitch in my 2 cents here, or 3 cents, I'm not sure how you say it, about my own experience and how that still affects me today. And one of the things that I've noticed that I can use as a benchmark a lot is my name. Obviously that's the same for a lot of trans girls, but I didn't realize how true that was until, well, I changed my name. Started going by another name. Me being me with the voice that I have and with the general look that I give off. There are, oh geez, Christ. It's very hard. I would assume it was very hard for a lot of people in my life to actively just switch names off rip because I said that's my new name and don't use my dead name. I totally understand that, I guess. Like, inside looking out, I get it. That's just kind of how society is. But yeah, no. With my name, it is just such a good benchmark to see who believes me, which is a horrible thing to say, and who was just kind of, maybe maliciously or not, just going along with it. Yeah, that kind of opened my eyes to a lot of things. One of the most negative experiences I've had being trans was with my parents, again, unfortunately, and my name. Essentially, I told them, hey, my name is Holly. That is the name I've chosen. This name is, it means a lot to me. It is, in terms of speech, the most direct recognition of my gender identity. It is it's something you're going to say all the time. It is something that is going to remind you that I am, in fact, not cis. But unfortunately, when I told my parents my name, what I got at the time, it really just hurt me and still hurts me, was essentially a spit in the face. I get it. I don't have the parents' perspective, but with what I'm about to describe to you, you'll understand why I kind of don't have a lot of sympathy for my parents, and specifically my mother in this case. To her, me changing my name to Holly was essentially the same as me dying. She was already going to this therapist to be more a progressive therapist to try and understand things, and whatever that therapist told her, because she repeated it to some of me, was so ridiculous that I just couldn't believe it. Essentially telling her, like, hey, if you want to accept your new daughter, you need to kill your old child in your head. That old child is dead, no longer exists. And if you're anybody who knows anything about being trans, this is pretty damn ridiculous, right? It's nonsensical. It has no basis in reality. I am, regardless of my name, the same person, same sense of humor, the same love life, the same interests. I think I said that twice. The same morals, the same moral compass, the same political views. I am the same exact person with a different name. That means something to me. But to my mother, this was an affront to basic, which feels like an affront to how she raised me. She was not furious, but she just did not understand why the hell I wanted that name. And yeah, essentially, I'm taking just a barrage of very passive aggressive comments about my name, genuine anger, and that same feeling that I had to comfort my mother instead of myself. That really came back in full force. But yeah, oh Lord, I've lost my train of thoughts like 4 times in this video. But yeah, and essentially it hurt, right? For parents who, at the end of accounts, had been generally okay, or not okay, but were doing a good job pretending that I wasn't trans and such, you think they would be at least somewhat open to trying my name. And yeah, basically piggybacking off that conversation, I dealt with the same things again. Of, yeah, but you don't dress like a girl, you don't walk like a girl, you don't talk like a girl, you play video games, which is not a thing girls do, I guess. You just act like a man. Why would you want to change your name? And essentially, that's the thing that irked me a lot, was essentially, hey, yeah, you can say you're trans, like, yeah, sure, keep this, just say you are, but really, you're just a man, aren't you? You don't have to pretend, it's okay. You're just a man, aren't you? And yeah, that kind of really just pissed me off, because it was a reduction of everything I had gone through up to that point, but it was also it was mockery, right? Of very serious conversations. Yeah, it really just, I don't know. One thing I remember saying is, I basically told him straight, like, hey, look, you guys, my own parents, are the only people in my life who do not call me Holly. There was conversations in the past about it, about maybe trying. They have never, ever once called me Holly. Besides when it's a conversation about the word Holly, or like the name Holly in general, they have never tried or even attempted to call me Holly. It's just never been a thing. It is to them, because I, before that I was so non-confrontational. They were, I guess in their eyes, fortunate they get to just stuff this all into the box of bad things and say, oh, I don't have to pretend that my son is trans. I don't have a daughter. How would I know? But yeah, it was rough. It was definitely rough, Basically, there was never any attempt from them to recognize me as their daughter. And to this day, they have never once, if they're calling my name to do something in the house or they need me to grab something, they have never, ever once called me Holly. Never, ever. And, I don't know. It just sticks with you. And the biggest gripe I had about that conversation is, my mom is she's making a very big deal out of me changing my name and going down this path, quote unquote, and basically acting that me forsaking my name is practically me dying, And I told her, that's not my name anymore. It's just not my name anymore. And you know, this name has meaning to me. It's indicative of what I've gone through. And she just says the most hypocritical thing. Hypocritical is probably the word here. The most just ridiculous thing that she could have said. And basically, she's going, like I said before, she's going on and on how about my name means so much that I can't throw it away or I'll be dying in her eyes. And then I tried to flip that around and say, I understand. I see why you feel like that, but this is my new name. I want my own mother to be able to call me by name and really kind of rebuild these burnt bridges we've had for a while. But yeah, no. What happened is that she basically told me to my face, it's just a name. Why are you giving it so much importance? And I think that's when I kind of clocked out of the conversation. I couldn't do it anymore. I think I admitted it. I said, okay, fine. This is never gonna happen. I'd rather my parents pretend that I'm not trans and just pretend like nothing's changed, instead of having to deal with super uncomfortable questions, potential physical danger, from kind of just trying to get them to say my name. I said, from this day forward, it's my friends, me, they call me Holly. That's gonna be enough for me. There is not enough time in the world to sit here and concern myself with what they're saying. If they come, they come, but yeah, I don't know. It was just one of those things that you hear and you're like, wow, you really just straight up said that. Why would you say that? And it was rough. It was definitely rough. And yeah, from that day on, I think that's the last large conversation we had about me being trans, and that's in really 10 days here. That's gonna be I'd say in like another month or two. That's gonna be like damn near a year from when we last talked about me being trans and how that affects things. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna get any comments, but if anybody else kind of has that experience, then I'd love to hear about it, just to see, how you guys dealt with it, or how you're dealing with it. I think it'd be very interesting. I think there's a lot that's probably gonna overlap with a lot of people, but still would be cool to hear. But yeah, and this name thing isn't just with my parents. Wrapping back into that no one believes you and my own friends and perceptions of gender and otherwise. Essentially, I feel like with some of them, maybe it's not true now, but there was kind of this idea that when referencing me, it was a question of conscious thought. If I'm talking to my friend Jackson, I don't need to think about the fact that I'm calling him Jackson. That's Jackson, right? It takes me not even a second to think about it. The words are in my head and I'm saying it. For me, it sometimes felt, and even now, at moments, there's times where I feel like my acquaintances, friends, etc., just don't see me as trans. They are actively and just perpetually in that state where they have to make the conscious swap of my dead name and my name, my chosen name, just not to slip up. it's not natural, it's not free flowing. It's like Holly here, they, yada yada yada. And one of these cases was more recently, was after a party I went to. One of my, and I'm gonna not be saying names and stuff here, but it's probably gonna be like, I'm trying to make it vague, but it's probably gonna be not vague enough for the person it applies to not to say anything. But I'll cross that bridge when it gets there. But my friend, he was pretty inebriated. We were back at his house, and we're doing some dumb bit about planes. And part of the bit was involved saying my full name, I guess. Drunken ramble. And he fully just used my den name, right? My full den name. And I'm not the type of girl who really has deep resentment with my my den name. I mean, it's not legally changed, so it's sure as well going on those damn job applications. So, but hearing it from somebody that you've basically had already told that, you've already informed them of your name for the better part of 2 years, was just like, I wasn't sad, I wasn't instantly mad, I wasn't raging. It was just kind of one of those things in your brain where you go, damn, why is that even a thing that a name you still think about? Is there any chance you're gonna just do that in day-to-day life? It was one of those things, and it really, again, got me back into that mind space of like, wow, I probably exist in opposition to whatever stereotype or perception they have about trans women in their head, that it's not impossible, but damn near, it's damn near futile for them to see me as a woman. Because I'm going to tell you now, the easiest way to remember your trans friends' names, is to just see them as the identity they are. They say they are. It's that simple. It takes the subconscious work, but at some point it's natural. It's not something you have to think about. But, that was a pretty eye-opening moment for me. And again, if any of my friends watch, which you probably will, love you guys to death. And if the friend who was the person I was talking about here watches this video up to this point, I guess, no bad feelings. You don't have to say anything about it. It's just an example I wanted to use. But yeah, I still struggle with that feeling even nowadays, despite feeling much more feminine than I did before, and being much more, I guess, jaded, resilient. I still struggle with that feeling sometimes of no one believes me. Even internally. And actually, I'll go this into more depth here. And this feeling kind of leaks into other portions of my life. For example, start with some obvious ones here. Just being part of the queer community and being with other trans people. It's unfortunately, I found that it's not very common for a lot of other trans women to be as, I guess, comfortable as they are as I am. I'm very comfortable with myself, despite knowing I'm trans, and it's not one of those things that, like I discussed before, I'm not, I guess, in very strict gender binary ways, I'm not performing femininity as I should. What I've noticed is that it makes me feel alienated from other trans femmes sometimes. I've had other trans women essentially damn near to my face 4chan ones basically tell me that I'm not trans. That I'm faking it, or, you know, if I don't know this one niche reference or thing in the trans community, I am not trans. And but yeah, no, there's definitely moments where I felt like I would argue it's much better than with cis people, because there are still other trans femmes that kind of share experiences like that with me, or like that, or a lot of them are just much more understanding. But there was still that feeling of alienation regardless. And to kind of piggyback off of that, the other thing was my dating life. That's something I still struggle with, especially now that I really basically only date women, or try to date women. You know, me being as steadfast about my identity as I am, you know, I'm going on dating apps and stuff, or just in person, saying, hey, my name's Holly, my pronouns are she, her, sometimes on occasion, or sometimes if it's like a lighthearted enough situation, like, yeah, I'm a girl, I'm a woman, a lady. And it's been a struggle, you know. I just have a lot of, I guess, lesbian women don't see me as a woman, so they kind of just don't like me. You know, straight women turn out to be chasers at times, which is, I mean, not super shocking, but kind of shocking, you know. Straight cis girls just being damn good chasers, saying, hey, I want to see if I like men. It's like, okay, so you've already declared your thoughts on this whole thing with that one sentence, so I'm good. And then again, like I said before, just with cis lesbians, you might as well call it raps. Chances are that's just not happening. You know, and then T for T, probably the best thing, but as you know, with trans dating pools, especially where I live, little hint, it's Florida. It's damn near impossible for me to find like a T, you know, another trans girl to date. And yeah, and with that in mind, that kind of leaks into, even if I do get in a relationship, those feelings leak into how I date other people, you know. I can very quickly deteriorate my relationships. My last relationship, very sweet girl, you know, super nice, super supportive, you know, just all around, just a great woman. But basically, my own feelings of A, dysphoria, B, that feeling of no one believes you, and C, my own just general struggle with the dating scene, it makes me very passive, to the point where things kind of just fizzle out. You know, I'm just a very passive person. I sometimes feel like, you know, you actually, like, physically do not find me attractive. And it's just, it's a tough feeling, right? But yeah, I feel like I had more to talk about. This feels more like a event session that I'm going to be posting to YouTube, with kind of silly background music. But yeah, no. But I do want to say, you know, there's always a silver lining to these things. You know, I try not to feel too bad for myself all of the time. I try not to feel like I'm going through something impossible. And for me, how I've kind of coped with that is basically understanding that if you're dealt, you are dealt the cards that life gives you. You just play the hand you were dealt. And while that hand may be tough to work with, a struggle, a pain sometimes, they are your cards. You are the only one with the strength to sort through them, to play the hand as best as possible, and thrive despite the circumstances. And that's something that, if you are a trans person or trans woman, trans femme who's kind of going through, had very similar experiences to this, that's kind of my advice to you, is that, regardless of, what's going on, it is your hand that you must play, and you are the only one with the strength, knowledge, and resilience to play it. And I really think that if you keep that in mind and try not to compare yourself to others, as difficult as that can be all the time, you'll turn out all right. Again, this is like really only something that I thought about doing after watching ceicocat's video, or ceicocat, whatever. I suggest you watch it and watch her autobiography section because it's very compelling. Yeah, it's only something I thought about then, so shout out to ceicocat. I'll probably link her channel in the description of this video, and probably the video that I watched, just so you can get an idea of what's going on there. But yeah, no, what she said resonated with me a lot. At the end of the day, if what you're doing feels right, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what other people are perceiving you as or what they think. If they think you're, I guess, invading women's spaces or you're a fake trans woman, let them think that. Who cares? It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because they're not you. They don't have an understanding of how you feel and the things you've gone through to get to the point where you are today. So yeah, I feel like a lot of the juicier stuff was near the end of this video, and I'm pretty damn lazy when it comes to editing. So I'm probably just gonna end up uploading this raw to YouTube, and hoping someone sees it. Again, and I kind of wanna leave off kind of talking about what I talked about before with ceicoCat's video. It doesn't really matter how it came to be. If you are trans, no matter how different your journey looks or is looking or looked, just know that it's okay to be who you are. You're not faking it. Don't walk around with that burden that I did of feeling like no one believes you, And also, if you're like me, a trans woman who does feel that incongruence with their gender but doesn't get the worst dysphoria, and you're struggling with feeling like you're doing something wrong, or you feel like you or maybe you're not trans, just understand that if you probably discussed that experience with one of your cis friends, chances are they're gonna not really get what you're talking about at all. And I think that's proof enough that you are in fact correct about your transness. But yeah, I guess thanks for listening to me yap away about damn near nothing for like 2 hours. And I hope, you know, watching this, I guess, autobiographical compendium of Holly's life, you feel some sort of connection, or, you know, something you relate to, and that my very very pathetic words of advice at the tail end of this do make you think about some things. And yeah, I guess to really actually end it off, screw traditional gender norms for making all of this possible. And yeah, keep being you. And yeah, goodbye everybody.